Good evening. I am coming to you tonight from a different location, as you can tell. So I want to make sure we are not having any technical difficulties. So bear with me for a moment. That's good. I'm sorry for the very boring background. We have some blinds, but I do have this very badass chair, which is great. I am in the office of my dearly departed stepfather, who died last month from COVID. I am visiting my mother to help her because, that's what you do. And I have some red wine to make it all better. She actually, we decanted a whole magnum of red wine, and this is how much is left between me and my mother. So, like mother, like daughter. Tell me something. If I tap this microphone, do you hear my taps? Now I have to wait because there's always a lag in the chat. I know the right camera's working for once. No, you don't hear my taps? All right, let me just check my microphone setting. How's my sound quality in general? Like, if it's fine, I might just leave it. Please bear with me. I'm terribly sorry for the technical difficulties. What if I do this? Did that sound really obnoxious? The room is echoey. I'm very sorry. I'm so sorry. You guys are so great. You're so patient with me. No, you're right. That is the wrong. Here we go. All right. Now if I tap this, do you hear this like I'm tapping a microphone? That should work. I'm drinking Yellowtail red wine, good old Australian red wine, because it's just what we happen to have in the house. All right, you know what, YouTube? I guess that's going to have to be, I'm sorry. All right. No, you didn't miss it. Good evening. Welcome to the Vampire Book Club, where we talk about vampire books. I've started this vampire book club because I own very many vampire books that people have sent me, because I have made a career out of discussing vampire media. And in this career, people want me to discuss things that they have experienced that I have not discussed yet. So many people have sent me very many vampire books. And I have a vampire library, which is a room in my home that is full of vampire books. There's some 350 vampire books in this room. And of course, I haven't read all of them. Takes a lot. So I started the Vampire Book Club so that I would be more motivated to read more quickly all of my vampire books. I am a member of several other book clubs, but this is a specifically vampire book club where we only read vampire books. And I choose several books from my shelves in my vampire library, and I put them to a vote every month for the Vampire Book Club and let the members vote on which book they want to read. And this is all done through Discord, and it's free, and anyone can join it. It's a private book club, but all you have to do is join my Discord. The link is in the description, and then just click the right button and you will be admitted to the Vampire Book Club. And this month, we read Lost Souls by Poppy Z. Brite. And this is a very famous work of vampire fiction, a very important work of vampire fiction that I had never read before. I had been very negligent in my vampire education, not having actually read this. This is like almost up there with not having read Dracula or Interview with the Vampire, or any one of those other very seminal works of vampire fiction that really influenced the genre and vampire media, not just books, but all vampire media that has come since. This came out in 1992. So that era, post Anne Rice, but pre 2000s vampire boom. Sorry, I need to turn my phone on silent so that won't interrupt us. So this is one of those books that I was surprised people weren't demanding that I read and review more often. I knew it was important. I knew it was a big deal, but I didn't own it. And recently, last month or the month before we actually voted for it, one of my Discord members of my Vampire Book Club sent it to me at my P.O. box, and I put it up to the vote with a couple other urban fantasy novels, even though this isn't technically urban fantasy. This kind of predates urban fantasy. And this won the vote. So now we finally read it. So now I have filled in that gap in my vampire education. Thank you. So what is this book? Why is it so important? Why is it such a big deal? Poppy Z. Brite. This was his first book. He writes a lot of different kinds of things, not just vampires, but this is what I think he's most known for, as far as I know. He wrote this book before he transitioned, so there's a lot of confusion about who Poppy Z. Brite is. Poppy Z. Brite is a gay man author who is trans, and was writing under this pen name before he transitioned, but as far as I know, still uses this pen name. Someone was asking in the chat earlier if he still uses this pen name. He hasn't written a book in 10 years, so I don't know what he's doing now. But this book came out in 1992. I think it was his first novel, or his first big novel. And it's similar to urban fantasy, but it predates what we know of as urban fantasy. Urban fantasy is a genre where you have fantastical things like vampires or werewolves or witches or ghosts or whatever set in a modern urban city setting where the real world is the real world, but vampires or whatever exist alongside of it or in the underworld of it or maybe coexist with it. And then usually the way urban fantasy goes is there's a plot. There's a mystery or a murder to solve, or someone has a problem to solve. There's usually a bad guy. There's usually a 3-act structured plot. It's very common in urban fantasy. This doesn't have that, which is why I say it doesn't really count as urban fantasy. Even though it is fantasy set in an urban setting. Similar to how, the Sookie Stackhouse novels are, or the Jim Butcher Dresden File novels are, that kind of same thing, but kind of like proto, before Anita Blake was Anita Blake. And the setting for this is mostly New Orleans, which is great because it starts with Mardi Gras, and today is Mardi Gras, so happy Mardi Gras, everyone. We just coincidentally had a nice thematic thing. I should be drinking chartreuse because that is the drink in this book. But no, I'm drinking my red wine because it's what we had in the house. So this book was important because it's very stylistic. And it came out in 1992 when vampire literature was still, it wasn't very hegemonic yet. We didn't have that urban fantasy, every single kick-ass leather-wearing hero or heroine solving murder mysteries and killing vampires or being a vampire, or both, often both. It doesn't have that kind of murder mystery plot or any plot at all. It's very plotless. It's almost kind of like literary in that way. I have not read a lot of Stephen King, but it felt Stephen King-y to me in that it's weird and meandering and kind of artsy, and doesn't really fit into any one genre. It's definitely horror. I would definitely classify this as horror, adult horror. Some people were asking in our book club if it would be considered YA by today's standards because it came out before YA was a thing. No, it would absolutely not be considered YA. Nowadays, it's very difficult to write books about teenagers without them having to be YA. Even if you don't write them as YA, the publishing industry will try to make them YA by either making the author do extensive rewrites or marketing it a certain way or something, but it's not a YA novel. That's not to say that teenagers didn't read it. This gained a lot of popularity with teenagers, but it was the sort of teenagers who were reading adult novels, reading like Stephen King or like Michael Crichton or, whatever the adult pulp fiction author du jour was, those kind of teenagers that were reading those more adult books. And this book got so popular with kids, especially goth kids, because it is a vampire book and it's very goth in style, that it had a big influence on the genre. Those people that were influenced by this book then grew up and started making vampire fiction and vampire movies of their own, and it had that impact. And what is that style? This style is very early 90s, 1992, so it was probably written in 91 or even the late 80s, depending on how long it took this author to write this book. Grunge, punk, goth, very gritty, very dirty, very filthy. No one ever bathes once in this book. Everyone has greasy hair that's got bad dye jobs and is spiked up to here. They all have like safety pins through their faces, wearing leather jackets and black and wearing like very goth, lacy funeral clothes. Everyone's listening to Bauhaus and The Cure and like all these like early 90s bands. Everyone is poor. Everyone is dirty. Nobody feels happy at home. This is a very miserable book. There's a few groups of characters in this. There isn't really one main character. I wouldn't even know who I would call the protagonist in this. So it starts off with this character who's a vampire, Christian. And he is this 380-year-old vampire, but we don't know that yet. So he has a bar in New Orleans, and into his bar every night comes this goth girl. And this goth girl just wants to be a vampire so bad. She thinks vampires are real. She wants to find one. She wants to be one. And then one night on Mardi Gras, these three other vampires come into the bar. And their names are Zilla, Molokai, and Twig. And these vampires are different than Christian. So Christian's a very old world, old school vampire. In this universe, vampires are a different race than humans. So you can't become a vampire, even though this girl wants to. You're born a vampire, but as the generations go on and as vampires interbreed with humans, vampires change. So Christian's an old world, old school vampire. He can't eat real food. He only lives off blood. He has that look. But these three new vampires are modern vampires. They can eat regular food. They can get drunk. They can have booze, and they're party guys. And they live their life in a van, traveling from town to town, killing people and eating candy and getting drunk and then moving on and causing destruction in the next town. And that's their lifestyle. And they've been around since like the early 1910s. So the novel starts with these three vampires pulling up to Christian's bar. Christian being a vampire. They're like, what? I'm a vampire. You're a vampire. We're all vampires. This is great. Hey, there's a goth girl here. Let's eat her. So this goth girl's like, it's her dream come true. She's very happy. She has sex with one of them. They all are drinking each other's blood. They're being very vampire-y. Very dirty, very filthy, lots of body fluids. Like anytime sex is mentioned in this book, it's very like gross. Fluids everywhere, blood everywhere, wounds, cuts, lots of spit. I think the word spit is mentioned in this book like 42 times. And in the end of the night, these three vagabond vampires roll out of town, and this girl is left behind pregnant. So we find out that if a vampire impregnates a human, the half vampire baby will kill the mother as it is birthed. It's really gory and gross. Let me think. We should probably have some like content warnings. So content warning for DumbCon, kind of, I guess, because, she doesn't know what's going to happen to her when she gets pregnant. Body horror, pregnancy horror, death in childbirth, definitely rape later on in the book, like total non-con rape, incest, lots of incest. suicidal ideation and actual suicide, and murder, of course. Not just vampire murder, but actual human murder. And I think that's all the warnings. Gore, violence, lots of gore, lots of squick. So be warned, please. Oh, thank you, Lindsay P, for the $4.99. You're awesome. So she's left pregnant, and Christian, the vampire, kind of takes her under his wing and takes care of her because he knows she's going to die when she gives birth to this baby, which she does, but she's his girlfriend until then. So she dies, she gives birth, and the baby, as it's being born, kind of like eats its way out of her, and like she dies of blood loss because it's sort of like shredded her insides on its way out. It's very gross. And Christian takes this baby and he goes and he like leaves it on a doorstep because he's not going to raise a baby. And he leaves a note with this baby that says, "This child's name is Nothing, capital N. Care for him and he'll bring you luck." So he leaves it on this very rich looking doorstep. The people take it in, they raise this boy as their own. And they rename him, they give him a normal name, Jason, but he finds this note, so he knows his name is Nothing. So Nothing is now 15 years old. And he's maybe kind of, you could argue he's the protagonist of this story, even though there are other equally central characters. And Nothing is obsessed with this band. This band is called Lost Souls, like the title of the book, except it's Lost Souls ? And this band is just two guys. And it's a singer and a guitarist. And they live in North Carolina, which is where I live. So it's kind of like one of those small world books. And of course, they play really artsy, weird goth rock music. It's very like heavy, you know. So there's just like a little indie band, and he's got like a homemade cassette tape because it's the 90s. And he's obsessed with this band. And he feels like this band gets him because his parents don't get him. He knows he's adopted. He knows he was a doorstep baby. And he wants to go like run away from home and go to find this band. That's what he wants to do with his life. So he does. And meanwhile, we've already met the members of this band. Their names are Steve and Ghost. Ghost is a psychic. He's from a long line of clairvoyant psychics. He can see ghosts. He can talk to spirits. He can talk to the dead. He can see the future. He has premonition dreams. He's very clairvoyant. They say he's sensitive. He's also just kind of a nice guy. Steve is an asshole. Steve is the guitarist, and he is just this like very toxic machismo guy who just thinks he's like hot shit and he doesn't take shit from anyone. And the only person he's ever nice to in the world is Ghost. And you just hate this character, Steve, right? Like he's no redeemable qualities except he's super sweet to Ghost all the time. Like even though he's very much like no homo, man, no homo, he'll still like pet Ghost's head and like let him sleep on his lap. And it's just like he gets really sweet with him. And we find out that Steve has recently broken up with his girlfriend because she was cheating on him, because he was an asshole, and whenever they would have sex, he would hurt her a lot, which she didn't like. So she cheated on him with like a nice guy who actually felt good, even though she doesn't like that guy, and she's still in love with Steve because she's drawn to that because she's unhealthy. She's also a goth girl who wears like funeral veils all the time. Her name is Anne. But when Steve found out that she was cheating on him, he raped her, violently raped her, and then felt really bad about it. And so like she dumped him completely and they broke up. And Steve is very upset about this. He's like going through trauma, like, oh no, I'm a rapist, I'm a horrible person, but also I am a horrible person, so I am going to be horrible. You know, it's very complex. You have a lot of unlikable characters in this book, and that's fine. Like writing unlikable characters has a stigma now, but it shouldn't. Like this book is not a feel-good book. There is no one in this book who you're supposed to be rooting for, I think, because the book also doesn't really have a plot where someone's really trying to do anything. It's kind of like a meandering slice of life. This is just a thing that happened in these people's lives, and here's how it went story. So yes, Steve is complex. He's not a cartoon villain. He's not shallow. He's not one-dimensional at all, but he is awful. downright awful. And Anne is a lot more shallow. Like, Anne is not written as well as Steve is, unfortunately. We'll get to her soon. So Nothing runs away from home, and he is hitchhiking, and he gets picked up by the van of the three like nomad vampires, who one of them is his dad, which they don't know. And they pick him up, and they're like, hey, here's a kid, a goth kid. We can eat him. Oh, wait, he's a vampire like us. Let's adopt him instead. This is great. And then they all have sex with each other, and now he's having sex with his dad unknowingly to both of them. But they're vampires, so it doesn't really matter that much. Well, thank you, Truel, for the $7.99 A. I don't know if that's Australian dollars or Austrian dollars, wherever you're from. But thank you very much. Hope you are well tonight. I am doing very well. Thank you. All things considering. So, Zella, Molokai, and Twig pick up Nothing in their murder van. And they're all very gay together. And there's a lot of like queer stuff in this book, which is great because the gay characters are just like, what? We're gay. That's just how he is. And the only person who even thinks like being gay is weird or wrong is Steve. Everyone else just rolls with it. And they're just like, yes, it's perfectly natural to be bisexual. Even when Nothing was in high school as a 15-year-old, he's like, yeah, me and my friends, we're all bisexual all the time. It was the cool thing to do. So a lot of very cool queer rep in here. Not any trans characters, which interests me, considering as a trans author, just mostly bi characters. Everyone in here is bi, which vampires often are, which I agree with, because if you're going to be undead forever, why limit yourself? Fall in love with everyone. So Nothing tells the murder van that he's trying to hitchhike to this band. And they're like, sure, we'll drive you to this band, because the band puts their address on their cassette tapes, because it's the 90s and you didn't have to like hide your identity because you were afraid vampires would come to your door, fools. So meanwhile, Christian, the guy who like put Nothing on the doorstep 15 years ago, is living in New Orleans. He gets tracked down by the father of the girl who died giving birth to Nothing. And the father's like, I know you're a vampire and I'm going to slay you now. And he tries and he fails. And Christian's like, well, he failed, but he's going to keep trying, so I better get out of town. So he's leaving town. So he just like he hits the road and he drives until he can like runs out of gas. And he's like, well, I'm in this random podunk town in North Carolina. I better get a job as a bartender. And he does. And it just so happens to be the same exact town where the band lives, which is where Nothing is traveling to with his murder van full of vampires. And that's where Steve and Ghost live, and Anne. We find out that the father, whose name is Wallace, who tried to slay Christian back in New Orleans, when his daughter was like, I want to go be a vampire. She got really obsessed with being a vampire. She's like, Daddy, I'm going to go be a vampire. And part of her wanting to go be a vampire was apparently having sex with her dad. So we get some like flashback of incest there. And Dad is like super personally horrified about that. And now he has like angst and drama about that past incest. And it's part of why he wants to go slay the vampire, because he thinks Christian is the one who killed her, even though Christian was the one who took care of her until she died. He doesn't know that. But Christian is still a murderous vampire who kills little goth kids every night. So the murder van gets to this town, which is called Missing Mile, North Carolina. Really cool. Where the band lives. And they go up to the band's house and they're like, okay, kid, we drove you this far. Now what? And he's like, well, I want to go see the band. So they go into the guy's house and it's the middle of the day. So they're asleep because, everyone's a night owl. And they just break into the house. And then Steve is like, what the hell? These people are breaking into my house and they look like creepy vampires. So they attack him and then there's a big fight and he takes a baseball bat and he smashes one of the vampires' faces, the leader. So then he tries to kill him and then Nothing intervenes and he's like, no, stop. This is my favorite band. You can't kill him. So, they get away. And then the guy whose face got completely smashed in his face just kind of like pops back out and regrows. And they're like, oh, he's a vampire. So then they find out that the band is playing at a bar that night, and it just so happens to be the bar where Christian works. So, all the threads come together. So they go to the bar, and Nothing and his three vampire buddies listen to the band play, and the band plays, Meanwhile, Anne is there. She doesn't want to get back together with Steve, but she kind of just wants to like smooth things over and bury the hatchet. But then Steve is like an asshole to her anyway, so she gets upset and she leaves the bar. And Ghost has a bad feeling about this because Ghost has a bad feeling about everything because he's psychic. So he's trying to follow. And meanwhile, the leader vampire, Zilla, and Nothing go after her and they find Anne. And then Zilla has sex with Anne in the murder van. And now she's pregnant. Now she's going to like die from a vampire baby too, because that's what happens when Zilla apparently has sex with girls. So Steve finds out. He's very upset. They fight. He fails. Christian finds them and he's like, oh, it's you guys. And they're like, hey, we haven't seen you in 15 years. And Christian's like, hey, Nothing. I see you found your father. And they're like, what? I'm his dad? I've been having sex with him for a week. Who cares? We're vampires. It doesn't matter. Lots of incest. So then they all go back to Christian's house and they live there for a month. They're just hanging out, partying every night because that's what these vampires do. They just live this like decadent, filthy life. It's the most unglamorous portrayal of vampires, short of them being like mindless zombies that you see in fiction. Just like the absolute grungiest, 90s-est, like filthiest punk style of goth. Like this could not be further from like the glamorous, fancy vampires of the Anne Rice era, which started in 1976, right? But it didn't really get big until like 1985 when Queen of the Damned like blew everyone's minds. So in 1985, we've got this new style of vampire that's completely changed vampires. Anne Rice is very glamorous, very classy, very sexy. And this is just a complete 180 from that. And that's part of why this was so influential, because that grungy, filthy, just like decrepit style had a lot of influence on Vampire the Masquerade, World of Darkness, which formed a lot of basis for vampire fiction going forward. And I don't know if this book was directly influenced Mark Rein-Hagen when he wrote that game, but what this book influenced that, and that's where it came from. Yeah. It's interesting reading this after we read The Hunger last time, which was another very influential vampire fiction of that era. That was very sci-fi, very scientific, also a lot of very rich, fancy vampires, but this is just like these vampires are broke. They're homeless. They live in a van on a filthy, blood-stained mattress. They wear the same clothes for 6 months in a row. They never wash their hair. They're just disgusting vampires. So, they hang out in Missing Mile for a month, and then they're like, we want to go to New Orleans. Let's hit the road. So they do. They're going to like party van to New Orleans. Christian is still kind of worried about that Wallace guy because he's like, we'll go back there and he might try to slay me again. But you know what? Can't live life in fear. Let's just do it. So they do. And Anne is like, but I'm in love with you. You were the best sex I ever had. Zilla, I have to go after you. So she hops a bus and she's going to New Orleans too, impregnated. And meanwhile, Ghost, who knows she's going to die from this horrible birth that's going to happen, is like, wait, there's still time to have an abortion. If we can catch up with her, we can save Anne. Because she's his friend, and also Ghost loves Steve, and he knows Steve loves Anne. And he's like, you know, I want to do this for Steve, but also because I'm a good person, I want to save her. Ghost is a good person. He's not flawless. He definitely is supportive of an absolute rapist asshole. So, you know, but Ghost is definitely the nicest guy in the book. I mean, Nothing is okay. He's just kind of an innocent kid who gets caught up with murderers. And Nothing has also now become a full vampire. On their way there, they picked up a hitchhiker who happened to be one of his best friends from back home. And they're like, let's eat him. And Nothing's like, this upsets me, but I'm going to do it anyway. And then he eats one of his friends and he's like, I am a vampire. Surprise. So they get to New Orleans. The vampires are just like partying. Steve and Ghost get there and they're like, we have $5 in our pocket. We don't know what to do. And Ghost's like, my psychic senses have led me to someone who can help us. And they get to this voodoo shop where this voodoo guy is there. And this guy is like, I used to be an aristocrat in oldie times, but then I died and brought myself back to life through magic. And I know exactly who you are because I too am psychic. And you can stay upstairs with me, but just be warned, there are vampires that live upstairs. But this is a different kind of vampire from the vampires that Christian and Zilla and Molokai and Toy Did Nothing are. So this kind of vampire is more like a psychic vampire. What they do is they make you fall in love with them, so it takes time. And then they suck all that love, life energy out of you and leave you like a dry mummy husk. They're not drinking your blood. They're not energy vampires. They're like soul vampires, sort of. And these are twins. And Ghost had previously had dreams about these twins because he's psychic that way. So it's not like they come out of nowhere. They've been established. So this voodoo guy, Arkady, is helping them. And he's like, so go find Anne and I'll concoct a magic potion that will make her have an abortion that, because she can't have a regular abortion because it won't work. She has to have a magic abortion. And then it will save her life. So Ghost goes out to Marie Laveau's grave and he does the thing where you put the red X's on the grave and then he gets a magic summons that tells him where Anne is and he finds her and he brings her back. But of course, Anne doesn't want an abortion. She's like, I want to have this baby because I'm so in love with this vampire that seduced me because I've been bewitched. So they have to drug her and they force it upon her. And this is what the second female character in the whole book who's also being manhandled and abused. Women in this book do not fare well. I mean, nobody in this book fares well, but just women are treated awfully and they're not well written at all. So they give Anne the magic abortion medicine. Meanwhile, the guy doesn't tell them, hey, I've never tested this before. I don't know if it'll work. And then he's like, I'm going to stay here with her. You guys go out and watch the vampires who live next door do their show while you wait. And when you come back, she'll have had her miscarriage and everything will be good. Meanwhile, the party vampires have run into Wallace, the one who wanted to slay Christian. And he tries to kill Nothing. And Nothing's just this 15-year-old kid. So he's, it's very dangerous. He realizes he's Nothing's grandfather through Nothing's mother, but he still wants to kill Nothing because Nothing's an abomination. So the other vampires jump out and they rescue him and they kill Wallace and they drink his blood. But turns out Wallace has cancer, which was mentioned before when Christian tried to drink his blood. And he was like, ew, this blood is gross and sick and it will make me sick. So they drink his blood and then they all get very sick. Basically, they have vampire food poisoning. They drink cancer blood, so now they're going to be puking for 24 hours. So they're laid up in their room, puking for 24 hours. And Christian's the only one who's fine. But we've already established that Christian, if he drinks alcohol or eats food, he gets sick. And they're like, well, if we're sick for 24 hours, you should be sick for 24 hours too. And they bully him into drinking alcohol just to be sick with them. It's very upsetting. So these 5 vampires are lying around being sick. Meanwhile, Steve and Ghost go out to party at this bar where the psychic vampires are putting on a show, and Ghost gets a bad feeling because that's what he does. And he runs back to where Anne was, and he finds out that the psychic vampires have murdered the guy who was helping them and also murdered Anne. And Anne had this miscarriage, but she bled so much that she died. So now she's dead. But she was going to die anyway, so it's this whole well, I feel bad for drugging her and forcing this abortion on her, but also she was going to die anyway, and it was worth the shit. It's this very confusing moral quandary that mostly Ghost is going through because he's the only one with a conscience in this whole thing. But Steve is like, my girlfriend, even though we were broken up and I was awful to her. Vengeance! I'm going to go find the vampire who impregnated her and slay some vampires. So he goes and he finds him. And because they're all sick with vampire food poisoning, he actually manages to slay him. And he slays Christian too, which is just sad. Yes, Christian was a murderous vampire who killed little goth kids all the time. But he was smart and capable and probably one of the only characters I actually liked in this book. But he just gets staked because he's there. and they forced him to drink alcohol so he couldn't like defend for himself. So that was tragic and pointless. But then Steve actually does kill the vampire who impregnated not only Anne but Nothing's mom, thereby, murdering both those women. So he kills her, or kills him, and all that's left are Nothing and the two like sidekick vampires. And Nothing is now so come into his vampire essence that he talks them out of killing the rest of them, and then he goes off and they live vampirely ever after. The epilogue is 50 years in the future, showing us that Nothing and his two psychic vampires are still undead and kicking and really, really grungy. Like it's like future grunge now because it's 50 years in the future. Meanwhile, Stephen goes to go back home, and they have they kind of have like an erotic moment. They kind of made out, and Ghost thinks when this happens, like, oh, when Steve isn't drunk anymore, he's gonna be like, I don't remember kissing you at all. But it's like, it's not that they fall in love and they get together and like become gay together. It's just that they've had this bond, and that's okay. And I really like that they have this kind of like mostly platonic, super strong male bond to differentiate it from the very erotic sexual male bonds and the other things. Anyway, they go home. They live tragically ever after. They're miserable and unhappy, but surviving, grow up, get old, are miserable, are haunted forever because, life sucks. Everything is dirty and gross and nobody washes their hair. So yeah, things happen in this book. I wouldn't really call it like plot, and there's definitely not a moral, and there's definitely, like, it's a story, I guess. But that grittiness, that like grim darkness of it, very influential, very important. Not my cup of tea, not my flavor of vampire that I love. Like, yes, I like goth aesthetic, but I like glam goth aesthetic, not grunge goth aesthetic. So it wasn't something that I loved. It's compared a lot to Near Dark and Lost Boys. So if that's your aesthetic, if that's your style of vampire, maybe it would be for you. Clearly, it was very popular. Spoke to a lot of people. The like sheer nihilism in this book speaks to a lot of people. It's written a very kind of poetic, artsy style. So if you have those sort of like highbrow aspirations to pretension of poetry, it might speak to you as well. And that poetry juxtaposed to like the disgustingness of the aesthetic is artsy as well. Oh, thank you, Victoria Stark, for the $10 Canadian. Do you think that this story is an effective tragedy, or do you feel like that is shocking for the sake of shock value? Would it be a different novel if Brite wrote this book when he was older? I don't think it's shocking for the sake of shock value. It didn't feel like torture porn. It didn't feel like gross out porn. There's definitely porn in it. There was lots of sex. But it didn't feel like it was for shock value. It just felt like this is the way it is. And you can write a sex scene romantically, or you can write it literally. And yes, there's a lot of fluids and spit and blood in case of vampire sex, and it's going to be gross. But to some people, that may be erotic. And to these people, that was erotic. So it was written erotically in a way that was gross to me, but I'm not going to kink shame anyone. It didn't feel like it was written for shock value. I think it was just this tragic idea that, a poet almost, I want to say, wanted to express. I can't even say that it was like trying to make a particular point. I think it was just a darkness. This book is a darkness that has been put into art form, in my personal opinion. I wouldn't read it again. It was a hard read for me. I had trouble getting into it. The artsy, like, purple prosy style of it was hard to get into. Not the story. The story was okay. I got into that. I wanted to find out what was going to happen, but just the writing style was difficult for me. I found myself getting very bored with it and being like, get to the action, but there is no action because there is no plot. But, it depends what you're looking for. I was thinking it would be more urban fantasy, which is very plot driven, very character driven, which this was not. This was very like concept driven. Let's see. Sophia Epsistina says, I found this to be an incredibly tightly written tragedy because what happens is inevitable because of who the characters are, which causes how they act and react to others' actions. It's kind of like saying real life exists because it does, which is true. It's hard to write, though, because a lot of times you could say you can't do that in fiction because if something happens in real life because the people who are doing it did it because that's just what they did, because that's just who they are. But you try to put that in a book. Sometimes you can't get away with that because books need to follow rules or something. This book does not follow rules. I think the fact that it got published is very lucky for the author. Someone definitely saw something in this that spoke to them, but it would be very difficult to get published, especially nowadays, unless it was by an established author who was known for being artsy. But things happen because of who's involved, because of who they are, and that's just what they did, and that's just how it went. If you tried to write a book like that now, the publishing company would be like, no, follow the structure. Now I'm looking at the chat because I've been talking at you for 40 minutes now. It's time to hear what you have to say. It was an expression of melancholy, I think. It felt full of longing and anger. It was raging against something, but I couldn't say what. I agree. I don't think I could say what either. Maybe conventionality, expectations, like maybe against the 90s sitcom perfect family style of contemporary art. Like in the 90s, I was a preteen. Pardon me. This book was kind of before my time, which is why I never read it as a kid. In 1992, I was 9 years old. So yeah, I wouldn't have read it. But when I was 9 years old, what was on TV? You had like Full House, Family Matters, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. It was like the era of the sitcom. Home Improvement. Roseanne was like the grittiest thing on TV, but it was still very like these nuclear family entertainment options, all those 90s movies, all those rom-coms. And this just shows a completely different kind of family structure, like the underbelly of America, of Southern small town, not rural, but small town America that you just never saw in media. And I think this art, this book, this story was sort of trying to just be something different, just show a different side of the world that you didn't often get in media. Yeah, that's a very 90s mood. You're right. It's very like counterculture, right? Counterculture. Don't wash your hair. Never bathe. If there was LGBT fiction back then, I was not aware of it. Do you mean besides this? I mean, in Anne Rice, though, as asexual as Anne Rice's LGBT-ness was, perhaps maybe this spoke to so many people because it was such a rare example of gay fiction that you could read. Very Daria, yeah. What's the name of the wine I'm drinking? It is Yellowtail. I don't know what it is. Probably a red blend, though. Maybe a Cab Sav. Oh, thank you. About my lipstick. I don't know what it is. I would have to go look at the box. But Lindsay Ellis gave it to me for Christmas last year. That's where I got this lipstick. So you could thank her. I hate nihilism, to be honest. So what are you going to do with this book after reading it? I'm going to very lovingly put it back on the shelf in my vampire library, because that's what the vampire library is, right? It's a collection of all things vampire, and it's not a bad book. Just because this book isn't for you, like I have read some bad vampire books, let me tell you, where the vampire is pointless, where the vampire is cheap, where the writing is bad, where the art is bad. This is not a bad vampire book. This is an upsetting book. This is a very difficult to read book. This is a very hard to stomach book, but it's not a bad book. There's a lot of triggers and content warning things in this book that probably aren't for a lot of people. So I would not recommend this unless you know exactly what you're getting into. But it is an important book, and it's going to go back on my shelf. And I probably will not read it again. But if anyone comes to me and they're like, I want to read all the like big important vampire books that they're hard to read, I would tell them to read this one. I would warn them about it, but I would tell them to read it. And I know incest is a big trigger for a lot of people. For me, with vampires, it doesn't bother me that much. Because in my personal opinion, vampires, you sort of like leave societal norms and you leave sexual stigmas. And incest is a stigma because it leads to birth defects and so on. But with vampires, everyone's going to die anyway, so why does it matter? Like, there's incest in Anne Rice as well. Well, implied asexual incest. Also, the rape in this comes from the humans, which I thought was interesting, because vampires are often a rape metaphor, right? Because a vampire will seduce you and then use you in a sexual way, even though the biting is a metaphor for sex, without letting you know who they really are or what they really are. So therefore, it is dubious consent, like you can't consent willingly to that, right? So it is a rape metaphor. Or vampires will often sneak into your window at night and attack you in your bed without your consent. That's like more direct rape metaphor. But in this, the rapist is a human, which I thought was sort of an interesting exploration of that trope. It's still very dark and gritty and dirty, though. Steve George says, even though a lot of the material may seem transgressive for transgression's sake or just icky, it does place that in decent literary fiction and make it a worthy subject. Yeah, there's a lot of icky stuff in literary fiction for the sake of artsiness. And I think a lot of people that live in shelter bubbles don't realize how prevalent incest and rape are in many communities in smaller rural areas of America. Like, it's a big deal. It happens, and showing it in fiction isn't disingenuous, even if it is upsetting. And this book is upsetting. Be warned. There is some characterization for Anne, admittedly not much. Yes, Anne is not a bad character. She is less developed than the male characters, but she's not bad. I like that she's an artist. She has a hobby. Her life doesn't revolve around a man, even though she's very hung up on the men in her life. She still is like, she's an artsy girl. She doesn't shave her armpits because she thinks that makes her more authentic. She has quirks. She is interesting. I think if we had more female characters, if some of the characters in the book were just gender swapped, that were female instead of male, then it would have been more balanced. Everyone in this book was awful, so I'm not saying we need good ones and bad ones. We just need more. That would have been nice. And if the only two female characters we had in this book both died in childbirth, essentially by being impregnated against their consent by a vampire who was just an evil asshole, that would have been great too. I'm going to scroll up in the chat a bit. If you asked me a question earlier and I didn't answer because I was not looking at the chat until now, feel free to ask it again. If I don't answer this time, it's because I do not have an answer for you. Ghost lets Steve get away with everything because he has a huge crush on him. Ghost is definitely Steve's biggest fan, but I loved how asexual Ghost was. Like, they even used that word in the book. They call him asexual. And as an asexual person, I'm just like, yeah, I feel it. Like, you get that kind of emotional attachment to someone without it being like, now we're going to go have sex. Because everyone in this book was like, now we're going to go have sex. And Ghost wasn't lusting after Steve at all. He just had this bond with him. And I love seeing that, you know, even as awful as they all were. Yeah, we didn't see any female vampires in this book, you're right. And there are female vampires. There was one mentioned. We heard about a female vampire that the voodoo priest character had known in his past. And he said that she was terrified of getting pregnant. So he never had sex with her because she would not have sex with anyone because she did not want to get pregnant. And then one day she was raped against her will and got pregnant anyway and then died in childbirth because that happens every time a vampire is born. Isn't that great? I saw someone in our Discord discussion of the book mention that the pregnancy horror in this may be rooted in the fact that the author is a trans man, and pregnancy horror is a very real thing for many trans men. Maybe. Who knows? Don't worry about it, says, I used to write exclusively about guys back before I knew I was trans. It was a way of exploring masculinity before I realized why I was so absorbed with it as a concept. Could have been true for Poppy Z. Brite. I mean, maybe. That would be like saying a male author, a cis male author writes mostly about men because a cis male author is a man, so therefore they know that best, so they shouldn't put any women in their book. I wouldn't let a cis male author get away with that. So why would I let a trans author get away with that? And many women, cis women or trans women or anyone who's writing a book that has many women in it will still have plenty of male characters. Like, you don't often see that the other way around. A lot of characters that are very male-centric and mostly have male characters where the women characters are just love interests or just mothers or just, you got like the virgin, the mother, and the whore, right? Those are the only three women you're allowed to get in very like dude-centric books. Given that it was the author's first book, maybe that was just his like learning curve. I haven't read any of his other books to see if he does better by women, but as an author, even if you feel, you know, you're drawn towards one gender more than another, it's still good to have a diverse cast of characters. Also, like, was everyone in this book white? I think so. You know, maybe some non-white people would have been great too, especially since it's set in the South. Like, where are all the black people? You see, Anne Rice writes a lot of male characters, right? Right. Most of Anne Rice's characters are male because Anne Rice identifies more with males. She's never transitioned, but Anne Rice has often said that she doesn't feel like a woman and she doesn't identify as a woman. She doesn't identify as anything. She doesn't say she's non-binary, but it comes out she's like, I just feel more comfortable writing from a male point of view. And yes, you can have that point of view as your central point of view in your book, but around that person, there should be diverse characters. Like, there should be women over here and women over here, you know. That's what I would have liked. Like, I didn't need a main female character, but just more female characters would have been nice. More female characters who didn't just get pregnant and die would have been nice. Like, they could have been assholes. They could have been bad. Why couldn't the twins, the evil twins who, like, psychic vampire, they could have been female. Why couldn't Molokai and Twig have been female? I don't know. Christian could have been female. Maybe he could, because Wallace thought he was the murderer. But, there are a few that could have gone either way. That if I was casting it as a play, I'd be like, let's cast this gender swap. In my personal opinion, I happen to like women very much. I did find it ridiculous that even female vampires can't survive pregnancy, though. Well, I think what happened was when the vampire baby is born, it's eating the mother's insides before it comes out. So, you're just internally bleeding and your guts are all chewed up. It's eaten through your organs, and that's why you die, from what I understood. And yeah, using writing as a way to, process your dysphoria and express yourself and get more in tune with your gender identity that isn't the way you're presenting at the time, totally valid. I totally get it. I get why Poppy may be more focused on male characters. Not complaining about that. I just wanted females as well on the side, because there's so many side characters we could have. You're right. Christian mentions that he can only be killed by destroying the brain or the heart. So why would a female vampire die in childbirth? I don't know, Vicky S. That is an excellent question. You raise a good point. Maybe Christian's different. I don't know. The one vampire we heard of, she did die in childbirth. Yeah, I mean, first-time novelist, you're right, C. George, probably suffers from the writer's dictum when starting out of writing, but first-time novelist in the early 20s doesn't always know that much outside their life, so I get it. Maybe in Poppy Z. Brite's other books, later books, there's more women. They get done less dirty, though everyone gets done dirty in this book. I can't be like, just the women. No, everyone's done dirty. Oh yeah, there's a lot of rape in this book. But it's a vampire book. You can't come into vampire fiction without understanding that rape is going to be part of it, either metaphorical or literal. Rape is part of vampire fiction. Pretty much any vampire fiction that you have, because there is always going to be an element of inability to consent. Anytime you have a vampire and a human together, the power dynamic in itself makes it impossible to consent, no matter what. Even looking at something like Twilight, right? Romance novel. How can you consent when something is so alluring as a way to trick you into loving it? Are those your real feelings? You don't know. You've been dazzled. I have not read any of Poppy Z. Brite's other books, so I do not know if they are all this dirty nihilistic. Does anyone else know? Tell us, because this is the first of his books that I've read. It was a tough read. It wasn't hard for me. There were some things that were so 90s. I was rolling my eyes. I'm just seriously? And some of the misogyny stuff was just kind of like that, but it was well crafted enough that I could appreciate it as art, even though it wasn't my personal flavor of art. Bloody Coffee says, it's not that I need a main female character, but when there's too many of one kind of person, it breaks my immersion because real life is not like that. Doesn't matter how fantastical the story is. That's true. However, on the flip side, you see a lot of criticism against stories that like this, where they're seriously, everyone's gay? not everyone is gay in the real world. It's just unrealistic when you have all these gay characters and the whole cast is gay. Because, they say that 1 in every 5 people identify as queer, right? So 20% of humanity. And it was probably 95% of the characters were queer. But a lot of times you'll neglect to realize that certain types of people flock together. So the queer people are going to find each other and hang out. And if this is a story about those people, then 95% of the cast is going to be queer because the queer people all hang out together. So could the same thing be said about dudes? Yeah, this book is all full of dudes because dudes just like to be with dudes and they don't hang around women. I don't know, why couldn't the owner of the bar have been a woman? Why couldn't, the guy who owned the record store where Steve worked have been a woman? There could have been women in other places. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just talking. It was tough for me to read. I felt like I was just hanging out with a lot of bullies, and I already have to deal with a lot of jerks at my job. It's not a feel-good book. You have to be in the right headspace to read this book. It's true. There's a tendency to treat vampires as hedonistic and bisexuality as a byproduct of their hedonism, which is problematic. I don't think bisexuality is a product of their hedonism. I think promiscuity is a byproduct of their hedonism. And I think the bisexual promiscuousness is a dangerous trope. Not all bi people are promiscuous. That's very true. But vampires are often promiscuous because they are hedonistic. And then if you're going to be hedonistic and promiscuous and undead, you might as well sleep with everyone instead of just a certain subset of humanity. So therefore you happen to be bi/pan. But that doesn't necessarily mean that bi equals promiscuous. Got to have the right balance there. The thing about hedonism with this book is that the hedonism in this book is so ugly. It's just gross. And that's a kink for a lot of people, that kind of filthiness. But oftentimes you think of hedonism, you think of glamour, of sophistication, of wealth and luxury, right? That is not what this is. A very different kind of hedonism. This is I'm going to spill blood and puke and wine on this mattress and then have sex on it and not even care kind of hedonism. That's what this is. You don't understand the term hedonism. It means you just are into pleasures, food, sex, material goods, money, shopping, just that kind of luxurious, just have what you want when you want it. That's what hedonism is. Yeah, murder hobo hedonism. That's the vibe of this book. Does anyone have any other questions, thoughts, or feelings about this book we want to discuss before we move on? Now is your chance. While you load in the chat, I'm going to decant more wine into my wine glass. I wish I had chartreuse. It's Mardi Gras. I should have something more New Orleans-y, but I don't know that I would even like chartreuse. The reason we're talking about chartreuse is because this book is the themed liquor of this book. And chartreuse is a green herbal liquor that tastes like tea in liquor form. It's also very sticky, sweet tasting. People compare it to absinthe sometime, but it's sweeter. It's not as savory. Was anyone in the book relatable? Oh yeah, there's plenty of relatable characters. Like everyone is flawed and has these like inner griefs and turmoils. It's like, yeah, I wouldn't have done what this character would have done, but I've definitely felt the way these characters have felt. I have felt that pain for sure. I just restrain my impulses and don't murder people. Chartreuse is a minor character in this book, that's for sure. I don't like the sort of hints I get in the world that people think this book should be banned because it's like promoting problematic things. I don't think it promotes any of the negative stuff that's in it. I don't think it's a cautionary tale either. I think it's just like, here's something ugly. Look how ugly it is. There it is. And I don't think people need to clutch their pearls over it in any way. This isn't like goth teens in the 90s loved this book because it spoke to them, because they're like, yes, I too am ugly and filthy, and whatever else they related to in it. But they didn't go out and start murdering people and raping people and having incest. Books don't do that to people. Dirty, grungy, goth punk teenhood. Yes, exactly. This is not the feel-good novel of the millennium. Yeah. So we're going to do a change of pace for next month. Next month for the Vampire Book Club, we are reading this book, which is Solace by Gail Carringer. It is book 1 of the Parasol Protectorate series. It's a novel of vampires, werewolves, and parasols. Very Victorian, I want to call it steampunk, but it's like that kind of like goth gas lamp, detective-y, strong, independent woman kind of style Victorian fiction. I will read you the summary. That's not the summary at all. Don't you hate it when they don't put the summary on the back of the book? Okay, here we go. Look how pretty this in papers are. This was like a special edition version that they came out with, I think, a couple of years ago. It's signed, it's autographed. I'm very happy to have this version. Sorry, I don't want to cover up my microphone. Alexia Tarabotti is laboring under a great many social tribulations. First, she has no soul. Second, she's a spinster whose father is both Italian and dead. Third, she was rudely attacked by a vampire, breaking all standards of social etiquette. Where to go from there? From bad to worse, apparently, for Alexia accidentally kills the vampire, and then the appalling Lord McCawn, loud, messy, gorgeous, and a werewolf, is sent by Queen Victoria to investigate. With unexpected vampires appearing and expected vampires disappearing, everyone seems to believe Alexia is responsible. Can she figure out what is actually happening to London's high society? Will her soulless ability to negate supernatural powers prove useful or just plain embarrassing? Finally, who is the real enemy? And do they have treacle tart? Treacle tart is delicious. Explore Gail Carringer's delightful comedy of manners, illustrated for the first time with stunning art by Jesse. Ooh, it's illustrated. Where's the? Oh, it is illustrated. Where'd that go? I just thought. Illustrated. Now I know why I was so happy to get this book. So yeah, a comedy of manners of Victorian high society vampires and werewolves and other snooty creatures of the night, parasols. A complete turnaround from this like grunge punk disaster dirt book. And I believe this is marketed as YA. Though a lot of books like this where you sort of have a young lady in society, even if she's like 22, because she's like a virgin, therefore it equals YA. So it's probably one of those like cuspy historical novels. I might be wrong. Maybe they actually marketed this as adult for once. But Orbit Books. Oh yeah, it just doesn't say it's for children. Oh, so maybe this actually is for adults. Oh, cool. I think it's just very popular with people who also like YA. So if that's your jam, join us and read this next month for the Vampire Book Club. Join my Discord server. Click the button in the intro channel that lets you join the book club because it's private, and you can discuss it with us in the Discord. And anything you say there, I will definitely use in my live stream later in what thoughts I put towards discussing it with everyone. We read books from the 13th to the 13th. We're doing, what is today, the 16th? That is because the 13th was a weekend and I didn't do live streams on the weekend. So yeah, the next live stream will be around about the 13th, where we will discuss Solace by Gil Carringer. Yeah, this is a very popular book, so it'd probably be easy to find in the library somewhere. It's been around for a while. Let's see, when did the first version come out? This is like a reissue. (2009). So yeah, it's been around for a while. Do you have any thoughts, feelings, or questions about Solace? And scroll up in the chat. Yeah, there is an audiobook. You can definitely get the audiobook. It exists. And it is part of a series. This is the first book in the series. I don't know how long the series goes, but if you're into it, there's more. Do we talk about Nothing? Oh, Nothing, the not protagonist of this book. What do you want to say about Nothing? He's a naive 15-year-old goth kid who's very slutty, and a would-be vampire who then is an actual vampire, likes blood, kills people, but kind of means well. He's not world weary yet. He wants the best for things, but he also just wants to find home. He wants to find family. He wants to find where he belongs, because he doesn't belong anywhere, because surprise, he's a vampire. And then he does find where he belongs. It's not great, but it's his, and that works for him. Happily ever after. What do you have to say about Nothing? I think the vampire in this book is a search for belonging, a search for home. The vampires take without giving, but they still need. It's kind of this unfillable need that, I'm sure a lot of normal people can relate to. It's just like you don't know what you want or what you need. It just never stops. This hole inside your soul. What do you do with it? We just hang out here on the off chance that you'll have the company of death or awoken in the discussion. Well, you don't have to ask me twice. I don't actually physically have them because I am here in my parents' house with this very boring background. I'm sorry, like, what do you have a view of a trash can? Like this lovely bamboo trash can. It's got like a napkin in it. No, that's a receipt. Sure you miss. Oh, there's cats here. You want me to see if I can find a cat? I can see if I can find one of the cats. I'm gonna open the door and see if a cat comes in here. I know the internet likes cats. Right. Door's been open. We'll see if we get lucky, right? There was one like right when I started the stream, but I didn't want to lock him in here. We'll see if he comes back. They're kind of shy cats. We'll see if we get lucky. Before Christian dies, he realizes that if he'd left, he'd lose nothing. Because nothing is a person that he cares about, but also nothing matters because nothing. Yeah, the fact that this kid is named Nothing means so many double meanings. It's very deep. I almost want to like go out there and find a cat. You guys all got so excited. We'll see if he comes. We'll see if he blesses us. There's two cats. One will absolutely not bless us. I won't even hold out hope for that one, but the other one might. We'll see. We can stay for 15 more minutes. Usually we end at about 10 o'clock. We'll see. Interesting that Christian is better adapted in some ways, but also more vulnerable in others. Yeah, Christian is a different kind of vampire. He's like the old school vampire. He's 380 years old. He can't eat or drink. He can't really go out in the day, but he's stronger. He has a better sense of smell. He's got better senses. He's like pure in the vampire line, whereas the modern party vampires are more human. They can go out during the day. They eat and drink food. But they each have their flaws. And we meet those, they're not psychic vampires, but those sort of like love vampires, whatever they are. They're like spirit vampires. And we're told that there are like 3 other kinds of vampires on top of that. There's just like all these different types of vampires. If I were to choose a director or cast an actor for an adaptation of this book, who would they be, for what role, and why? That's the worst question to ask me. You guys answer that question because I do not know directors or actors because I'm not hip with the kids. I'm a very concept-driven person. I like characters. I don't like people. Like, who are people? I don't know. But yes, tell me what you think. I'm curious to see. Scrolling back up. Actually like Nothing. His side story was more interesting. A naive child looking for a place to find home, only to get picked up by a group of murderers and slowly becoming a monster in the process. Sounds more interesting. It was very interesting. This book was not interesting. And I know I've disappointed the person who sent it to me because they were hoping I would love it. But I am very glad that I read it because I know how important it is, and I can sort of add that to my vampire education repertoire. It's on my resume. It's under my belt. Sorry for disappointing you. I know you love it so much. Yeah, change the characters and genders and the races in the adaptation. I would like that. Definitely would like that. Keep all the gay boys as gay boys, but anyone who's like a side character, mix it up. years ago, Brite did say that Snoop would be a great choice for Zilla. Zilla in the book looks nothing like Snoop, but I think Brite probably meant the attitude. So, sure. It would have to be grease on the camera lens. I'm loving the shade, you guys. You guys are awesome. Right. I'm caught up with the chat. If you have anything else to say, now's your chance. While I'm waiting, I'm going to see if I can go find a cat. So I found the cat. The cat did not want to come. There's two cats here. Their names are Orville and Wilbur because my stepdad was a pilot, so of course they are. But when I came here, I brought my baby. She is 1 year and 11 months. She's almost 2. I can't believe she's almost 2. Anyway, she's terrified of the cats. So as soon as she saw the cats, she screamed, and now the cats are scared, and you don't want to come out and see you. So I'm very sorry. Even though the baby is obviously not here, she is asleep. The cats are now traumatized and hiding. But if you really want to see them, I will post a picture of them on the Discord. So join the Discord. If you actually care, just ask me for it later and I'll give it to you. Anyway. Oh, okay. Scrolling up in the chat, seeing what I missed. Do I think that naming nothing was intentionally cruel from Christian or amusing or neither? Definitely the other or. I think Christian thought it was deep because he's that kind of goth. I know my book fell off the table. Definitely not a book that could happen in 2021. No, not a book that could exist in the era of Me Too and content warnings. And I mean, it could exist, but not be glorified. It would have to be making some kind of statement of yet. There would have to be some kind of morality to it, I think, in this era. It couldn't just be like it was in the 90s, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like, I feel like nowadays, when you have something like this, you do need to contextualize it and discuss it. Like, I couldn't just hand this to a teenager and be like, here's a book, read it. We would have to have a conversation about it. We would absolutely have to have a conversation. I'm very sorry to be a cat tease. With such high hopes. No, poor kitty's traumatized. The child has terrified it. Anyway. Any other thoughts, feelings, or opinions you want to share about this book before we wrap up? This is your chance. Until next time, we will be on the Discord server. There's a link in the description of this video. Just click that. And in the introduction section, you can click the icon that lets you join the book club. Otherwise, the book club is private. You can just join the Discord server and not join the book club to just talk about vampires or anything else that is spooky and gothic, which is what we discuss on this Discord server. There's about 500 people on it, but it's actually pretty chill. It's not a very active Discord server. There'll be like a conversation where like 4 or 5 people will join and then it goes quiet for a while. It's apparently common on Discord. There's no drama on my Discord server. We have never had any drama. The closest we came was a homophobe who I asked to leave and then he left. That's the closest we've ever come to drama. So join my Discord server. Be my friends because I'm so lonely. And my cats won't talk to me. And it's not that every book has to be morality play now. It's that you have to be responsible, I think, is what matters. You don't have to have a moral lesson or a story or have the bad guys get their just desserts. Like, you can write something awful and horrible and just have it be like torture porn or whatever you want. But you have to, as an author, as a marketer, as the company that's putting this book out, even like the publisher, whoever is responsible for this book has to do it from a responsible angle. They can't glorify it. You can't put out a book like that and make it seem cool. Like, if you put this book out and you're just like, hey kids, this is the next coolest thing, you would be being irresponsible, right? You would need to put it out with context. Like, the same exact book could exist. You wouldn't have to change it to make it a morality play. But the way it was put out, it couldn't just be like yeeted into the world. It would need context to be responsible. Just because you don't want to put something in the world that's going to make life harder for some people, right? You don't want to make art that will make other people who have less privilege than you have a harder time. That's not cool. And I think we can manage that. I think that's perfectly fine and easy to manage. So, join my Discord server if you haven't already. Or if you haven't joined it, talk to me because you're being quiet. Nobody ever talks on my Discord server. In the book club conversation or in any of the other sections, we're reading Soulless. Some people on the Discord have already finished it because it's apparently a very easy read and we voted for it on the 13th like we always do. Until then, I will see you on Twitter or on Facebook or on YouTube here. Yes, come to my Discord server and talk to me because I'm very lonely and I don't go outside because we are still in quarantine. Thank you all for joining me. Thank you for reading this book with me. I know it was difficult for some of you. I'm glad to have had this conversation. If you want to talk more about it, we can do that on Discord. We can do it on Twitter, anywhere you like. Yes. So until next time, good evening, good night. I didn't even finish my wine. That's the first. I should probably finish it before we leave. Good night.